I was 15 when my dad walked out on my mother and me. It was the typical story of a man leaving his wife and family for a younger woman. In this case, it was for his secretary who was 10 years younger than Mom. At first, Mom was pretty devastated. I just pretty much took it in stride. He had never been much of a father, always seeming to be too wrapped up in his work or hobbies to spend any time with me. I figured he hadn't really wanted kids, and I was just a mistake as far as he was concerned. I'm Jeff, by the way. Jeff Bradley, and my mom's name is Sarah. I became the man of the house for the next year and a half, doing all the tasks and chores my father had done or hired someone to do. Dad was paying child support to Mom as ordered by the court, but nothing more. Mom had a job working at a real estate agency, and between what she made and the child support we got by, there wasn't much left at the end of the month, but we didn't go without the basic needs. As I said earlier, Dad's leaving was a pretty big blow to Mom. When she was at home, she would sit around the house depressed. She still went to work and cooked my meals and made sure I had clean clothes to wear but little else. Since I would get home from school before she came in, I would spend an hour or two cleaning the house and wait until after dinner to hit the books and finish my homework. I wanted Mom to know I was there for her and would give her hugs and kiss her cheek and tell her I loved her. I was trying to console her. It was 8 months before my mother seemed to return to normal. As she did, she realized all the things I had been taking care of and told me how proud she was of me, and she would do the cleaning again, and I needed to get out more and spend time with my friends. I did go out once in a while, but I rarely stayed gone too long. I wanted to keep an eye on her and make sure she didn't slip back into her depression. About a year after my dad had left, Don Wilson and his daughter moved to our town. He was a rather successful lawyer and had taken a job with a large firm here in Dallas. We lived in one of the suburbs of Dallas. Anyway, Don had used the agency where my mom worked to find a new home for him and his daughter. He had noticed Mom and asked her out. She turned him down the first 3 times, but he was persistent. Mom finally relented and agreed to go to dinner with him. She still had a big issue with trust. Don was a total gentleman during their first date. He never pressured Mom or even made any unwanted overtures, to her great relief, and she agreed to another date. This led to a third, fourth, and so on. I began to see a real change in Mom. She was happy again. I would even catch her humming to herself. I had met Don when he would come to pick Mom up so they could go out. I liked him from the start. There wasn't anything phony about him. He was friendly and had a good sense of humor. We often talked if Mom was running a little late. It was 3 months before my 18th birthday when Mom said she was making dinner for Don on Saturday. He was bringing his daughter with him and begged me to please eat with them. I told her I would be there even though it meant I had to cancel the hottest date I had ever had. Mom could tell I was joking about the date part and kissed my cheek. I did date occasionally, but it was never anything serious. I rarely went out with the same girl more than twice. Don't get me wrong, I didn't just use them then dump them. It's just that I never seemed to really click with them. Saturday evening came, and I was in the living room watching sports on the tube when the doorbell rang. Mom was in the kitchen, so I went to answer it. When I opened the door, I saw Dawn standing behind a very pretty brunette. This must be Dawn's daughter. When my eyes met hers, she just rolled her eyes and gave me a disgusted look. Standing behind her, Dawn missed this. I had never met Dawn's daughter before, even though we went to the same school. But I knew who she was. She was a member of the rich clique who only dated jocks or guys from wealthy families who had the cash to spend on them. They looked down on anyone not in their group. Mom and I weren't rich, and I wasn't a jock, so I didn't interact with them. I hung out with a small group of average guys. We had similar interests, and none of them were troublemakers. I chose to ignore the look and invited them in. Don came in and introduced his daughter to me. Her name was Liz, short for Elizabeth. I held my hand out to shake hers, but quickly dropped it when she looked at it as if I had leprosy. I told Don that Mom was in the kitchen, and he headed that way. Liz turned and looked around the house, shaking her head. I was getting royally pissed now. Mom and I lived in a middle-class home, and it was nicely decorated as Mom has good taste. Granted, it wasn't a palace, but I was proud to live here, and didn't appreciate this stuck-up witch coming into my home and putting it down. For Mom's sake, I clamped down on my emotions and asked Liz if she would like something to drink. Without even looking at me, she just said, "No," and walked over to the couch and sat down. I had to get out of the room and calm down. I said nothing, just turned and went to my bedroom. By the time I heard Mom come out and ask Liz where I was, I had control of myself. Mom came to my door and stared at me curiously and said dinner was ready. I didn't say anything, just nodded and followed her to the dining room. Our dining table sat 6. Don was seated at the head of the table, and Liz was sitting to his left. Mom took her chair on the right-hand side of Don. The only empty place setting was in front of the chair next to Liz. I walked to the end of the table opposite Don and pulled out the chair. Mom had put each setting on a fancy placemat, and I reached over and pulled mine in front of me and took a seat. Dawn looked at me with a curious expression, but didn't say anything. The look I got from Mom let me know that she didn't appreciate my actions. I simply smiled and told her everything smelled wonderful. Dawn agreed and began to pass the platter around. I was hungry and dug in. One of the few times I glanced up, I could tell that Liz was barely picking around at the food on her plate. The conversation was mostly between my mother and Dawn. I finished eating and was excusing myself when Dawn spoke up. "Jeff, please stay. Your mother and I have an announcement, and we wanted you and Liz here with us at the same time." "Jeff, I have asked your mother to marry me, and she has said yes." The consequences of this statement didn't even enter my mind. I was happy for my mother. I was pretty sure that Dawn would be good for her. I stood and walked behind my mother and held my hand out to Dawn. "Congratulations, Dawn," I said sincerely, shaking his hand. "I know you have made my mother happy and will take good care of her." Dawn gave me a broad smile. "Thank you, Jeff. Your approval means a lot to me and your mother." I kissed Mom on the cheek and congratulated her too. Dawn looked over at his daughter. "Liz." "Oh yeah, congratulations, or whatever. Anyway, the girls are waiting for me, so I need to run," she said coldly. She stood up and walked out the front door. Dawn glared at his daughter's back as she walked out, but he refused to let her ruin his good mood. Dawn told me he was taking Mom dancing. I told them to go ahead and I would clear the table and clean the kitchen. I walked them to the door. Mom hugged me and kissed my cheek. "I love you, Jeff. You are the best son a mother could ever wish for." "Ah, geez, Mom. Don't get all mushy on me," I said with a grin. "Go enjoy yourself." Dawn held out his hand to me and gave me a firm handshake. "You're a fine young man, Jeff. Thanks again for your blessings." "Criminy, both you lovebirds are getting mushy. Go on, have fun. I've got a kitchen to clean," I said laughing. Mom and Dawn were both laughing as they walked to his car. They had set a wedding day for 3 months from now, about 3 weeks after my 18th birthday. It wasn't until the acute day of my birthday that the reality of the consequences of Mom's marriage set in. Mom had made my favorite meal, and of course Dawn came to celebrate my official arrival into adulthood. I was relieved to see Dawn was alone when he arrived, and his daughter was nowhere in sight. When Dawn went into the kitchen, I overheard Mom ask if Liz had come. Dawn did his best to make up some lame excuse about Liz having something or other she had to do. I knew the real reason she wasn't there, and it suited me just fine. Her presence would just put a damper on my big day. Mom put the meal on the table, and we sat to eat. A few bites in, Dawn asked Mom, "Well, darling, have you started packing yet? I can't wait until you move in." Mom laughed. "Actually, I was going to start this week. I've listed the house with my agency." Dawn looked at me. "I think you will like your new room, Jeff." "New room?" I said questioningly. "Yes, Jeff, your new room. You and your mother will be moving in with us as soon as we're married." Dawn said, Yeah, sure." I said none too articulately. I knew that once they were married, they would live together. Of course they would. But up to now, I hadn't thought what that meant for me. Maybe it was a subconscious attempt to block out the fact that I would be living in the same house as Liz. Hell, well, that went a long way at throwing cold water on my good mood. I had to get out and think. Mom knew I planned to meet up with some friends who had a small party planned for me. I quickly finished eating and told Mom and Dawn that I was going to meet my buddies. Mom looked at me with concern, but only asked me to be careful and not party too much. I assured her I would be careful and headed out. The prospect of being in the same house as Liz on a daily basis did kill some of my party mood. I know my friends could tell, but they were cool enough not to pry. I spent much of the night trying to think of a solution to my problem, finally resigning myself to the inevitable. The next day, Mom asked me if something was wrong, and I did my best to reassure her that everything was fine. I didn't want her to worry with her wedding coming up. The day before the wedding, I had moved the last of my stuff into my new room. It really was a nice room. I even had my own private bathroom, and it had a high-speed internet connection. That was nice because I sometimes like to play games with my buddies online. Yeah, and check out the free adult sites too. Give me a break, I was 18 with the normal hormone level of any 18-year-old male. I spent the night before the wedding in my new room. Mom, in the tradition of the groom not seeing the bride the day before the wedding, stayed at a girlfriend's house. The wedding was on Saturday, so Friday after school I would be going to my new house to spend my first night there. I knew Liz and her little clique usually headed for the mall after school, so I stopped at the drive-in on my way to Dawn's house and got a burger, fries, and a shake. I went to my room and closed the door, planning not to leave my room until it was time to leave for the wedding the next day. Don got home shortly after I did and came to my room to see if I was hungry. I held up the last of my burger I was finishing and told him I was fine and that I had a major paper I had to work on and wouldn't have much time. What with the wedding and all. He seemed to buy my story and left. I was online playing a game when I heard Liz going into her room. Her door was right across the hall from mine. I just turned up my headphones louder to help block out any noise that reminded of the fact she was that close. I slept fitfully that night. The next morning I got up early, dressed, and grabbed the suit I was going to wear and headed out. Don was already up and in the kitchen, and I told him I was going to make sure Mom didn't need anything at the last minute. Don asked if I wanted breakfast, and I told him I would grab something on my way. What I really wanted was to get out of there before Liz got up. I was to ride in the limo with Mom to the church, and I would be walking her down the aisle. My grandfather, Mom's dad, had passed on a few years ago, so I got to do the honors. The wedding went great. Mom looked beautiful. It really was so good to see her this happy. Liz and I just ignored each other at the church and did the same at the reception. Don had booked a suite for him and Mom in the hotel for the night. The next day they were flying out for a 2-week honeymoon. The reception was nice. Friends of both my mother and Don were there to help celebrate their wedding. Mom danced with her new husband several times. Anyone could see they were in love by how they looked in each other's eyes as they danced. Don announced that he was taking his bride to their room, and the bar would be open for another hour for those who chose to stay. I went and shook Don's hand and kissed my mother's cheek and wished them luck. I had seen Liz with a couple girls from her clique that she had invited to the reception. I looked around and spotted them still sitting at a table. I knew if I left now I could avoid her. I hurried out to my car and sped home and locked myself in my bedroom. I put my headphones on and listened to music until I fell asleep. I didn't hear if Liz had come home. I woke up Sunday morning and headed down to the kitchen to see if I could rustle up some breakfast. Just as I got to the bottom of the stairs, a somewhat worse for where Liz came strolling in. It was obvious she was just now getting home. She looked up to see me coming down the stairs. "What are you looking at, loser?" she spat at me. I glared at her. "I am looking at a nothing. An absolute nothing." I spun around and stomped back up the stairs, leaving her standing with her mouth open. She couldn't believe that a lowlife nobody like me would dare to speak to her that way. I locked my bedroom door behind me and pulled out my cell phone and called my buddy Jake. He had graduated last year and had a job working for his father's construction company and his own apartment. I talked him into letting me crash there for the next 2 weeks. I wasn't going to put up with that witch's bullshit while Mom and Don weren't here. I grabbed a duffel bag and stuffed what I needed into it and headed out. As I was packing, I had heard Liz's bedroom door slam, and I felt lucky that I didn't have to see her on my way out. Jake was a responsible guy. He didn't have wild parties. So the next 2 weeks weren't filled with two guys living it up. He had to work and I had school and my homework to do. All in all, we made good roommates. It sure was a hell of a lot better than putting up with Liz's shit. Mom called my cell phone a week into her honeymoon. She and Don were having a great time. She said she had called the house, but no one answered. I told her I was at a friend's house studying for a history test we both had the next day. Then she asked how I was getting along with Liz. I told her there were no problems. It was like she wasn't even there. I wasn't lying. A week later, Mom called my cell to let me know that they had arrived at the airport and would be on their way home shortly. I grabbed up my duffel bag, which I had already packed, and thanked Jake for his hospitality and headed back to my new home. I wasn't surprised to see Liz's car gone. In fact, I wondered if she had even been home at all during the last 2 weeks. Not that I gave a shit. I was in my room when Mom and Don got home and went down to greet them and help Don with the luggage. My mother was excited to see me and gave me a smothering hug. We got everything into their bedroom and we sat in the living room where they told me all about their honeymoon. I heard Liz's car pull into the driveway as Mom was concluding the details of their trip. I excused myself, telling them I had homework due tomorrow that I needed to finish and would see them at dinner. Liz came in and we passed each other as I headed for the stairs. I chuckled to myself at the glare she gave me. Liz did eat at the table with us that night. We didn't speak to each other. Hell, I never even looked at her. Mom, and I'm sure Don too, noticed. Mom came to talk to me later. "Jeff, what's up between you and Liz? I haven't ever seen either of you speak to each other, and you didn't even look at her tonight." "Mom, it's nothing to worry about. We just run in different circles and don't have anything in common, so there's not much for us to talk about," I told her. That much was true, so again I wasn't lying. I just left out the part of Liz's hatred and contempt for me. "Jeff, I wish you'd try to at least talk to her, okay, honey?" she asked of me. "Mom, I'm sure everything will be fine. It's just all so new. What with us living under the same roof," I answered, avoiding making any promises. The next week was pretty much a repeat. If we saw each other, she would glare at me, and I would smirk at her. That was our only form of communication. She ate dinner with us some nights, but was out with her friends on the others. It was a Monday evening, a week after Mom's honeymoon, when I volunteered to do the dishes. Mom thanked me and she and Don went to the den. I hadn't really paid any attention to the fact that Liz was still at the table, as her habit was to hastily eat then take off. I was putting the last of the dishes in the dishwasher, except for hers, and while bent over I felt an entire glass of ice-cold water poured over my back. I stood up and yanked my shirt over my head. Until now, Liz had never seen me in anything but baggy t-shirts. When she looked at me, bare from the waist up, she gasped. I had started taking karate classes when I was 13, so had always been in good shape. Then I began to work out with weights 2 years ago. I never pushed to be an over-muscled bodybuilder, but I did have highly defined abs and pecs. I was fairly slender at the hips and my muscles flared out as they met my shoulders. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled as loud as I could. My wrath temporarily startled her, and she took 2 steps back. I saw her face cloud over, and she was just about to tell me off when Don came running in. "What's going on here?" he demanded to know. "Your daughter," I spat out, emphasizing the word daughter, as I glared back at her. Just poured a glass of ice water down my back. I turned and brushed past Don and headed for my room. Behind me I could hear Liz begin to whine. "It was an accident, Daddy." I was trying to help and my glass slipped. I didn't hear anymore as I ascended the stairs. Mom came to my room about an hour later to check on me. She said that Liz had said she was sorry and it was an accident. I just looked at my mother and told her that hell would freeze over before I believed she was sorry for anything she had ever done. Mom could see I was boiling mad and didn't push me anymore. The next week when I came home, I would lock myself in my bedroom and only come out at dinner time. I would eat with Mom and Don if Liz wasn't home. If she was, I would take my plate to my room and eat alone. Mom and Don both came up to my room 3 days after the incident to try to talk to me, but I told them there was nothing to discuss. I refused to speak, and they left my room. I knew I was upsetting my mother, but I had reached a point that I was afraid of what I might do. Even though I was avoiding the real issues, I felt that staying as far possible from Liz was the best course of action. The next attack came the following Saturday. Don had taken my mom to the mall. I had been playing a little basketball with my buddies and had just got home and went to shower. I hadn't seen Liz's car when I got home, so I thought I was alone. I forgot to lock my bedroom door, just stripped and jumped into the shower. I was thinking about this cute gal from my class who was hanging around the courts earlier that day. Suddenly, a wave of ice-cold water come over the top of the shower curtain. I screamed and ripped the curtain back to see Liz standing there with a bucket in her hand. I don't know what she expected, but now she was staring at me totally naked. "You witch!" I roared and made to get out of the shower. Liz screamed in fear when she saw the absolute total rage in my eyes. Before I could grab her, she got to the door and slammed it behind her. As I got the bathroom door open, I heard my bedroom door slam, then hers. I ran into the hall, still naked, and rattled her doorknob to find it was locked. I pounded on her door a while, then went back into my room. That was the final straw. I had had it. I packed my duffel bag like I had done when Mom was on her honeymoon. I put on a heavy pair of work boots, tossed my bag over my shoulder, and walked into the hall. I faced Liz's door and kicked the center as hard as I could. Her door split in two. The half on hinges swung open. The other half fell inward to the floor. Liz screamed and jumped out of her bed and ran to cower in the farthest corner. I could see the terror in her eyes as I approached. I bent down over her shaking body. "Screw you, witch. You win. I'm gone." I turned and walked out her splintered door, down the stairs and out to my car. I tossed the duffel bag in the back seat and got in the front. As I started my car and put it into gear, the front door opened, and Liz came running out shouting my name. I stuck one arm out the window and shot her the bird as I sped off. I showed up at Jake's again as I didn't know of anywhere else to turn. I told him my story, and he agreed to let me move in. I had enough money saved up from my last summer job to pay for my own meals, and I would work on his construction crew Saturdays to pay my share of the rent. I waited until 9 that night before I called my mother. I had turned my cell phone off until I was ready to talk. I knew when she saw the split door and heard whatever lies Liz told them, she was going to be worried. Jeff, is that you? Where are you?" Mom cried into the phone. "Mom, calm down and I'll tell you." I answered. "But Jeff, why aren't you here? What happened?" She continued, sounding near hysteria. "Mom, I'm okay. Listen, I can't talk to you unless you calm down. I'll call you tomorrow." "No, Jeff, please don't hang up," she was yelling now. I was about to end the call when I heard a much calmer voice. "Jeff, this is Dawn. Son, your mother is very upset. Can you tell me what happened?" "Dawn, just tell Mom that I have moved in with a good friend and I am safe and sound." I will be living here now, but I will call her and arrange to see her often. As for what happened, why don't you ask your daughter? Then you both can choose to believe her lies or not as you please. Just as you both believe the incident in the kitchen was an accident. But she's your daughter and I'm just a stranger taking up space in your home. So I would expect you to side with her. Good night. With that, I turned my cell phone off again. I wasn't going to argue with Dawn or my mom. My mind was made up. I have never been one to hit a woman, but Liz had pushed me close to that point. She wasn't worth going to jail over. Sunday, I caught up on my schoolwork and then pitched in and helped Jake do some house cleaning. I waited until 9 that night to call my mother to see if she was calm enough to talk. "Hello, Mom," I said when she answered. "Can you stay calm enough to talk?" "Yes, Jeff, I will." "Where are you?" Mom said. "You remember my buddy Jake? He graduated last year. Anyway, he works for his dad now. He's got his own apartment that has a spare bedroom, and he's allowing me to stay here until I graduate. I will work for him on Saturdays to pay some of the rent, and I have money from my summer job to pay for other expenses," I told her. "But, Jeff, honey, this is your home. Can't you please come home?" "No, Mom, it's not my home. It's yours, Dawn and Liz's home, and Liz has made it too difficult to live there." It was bad enough with her verbal attacks, but when it started to turn physical, I knew I had no choice. I had to leave before I snapped and did something I regretted. "What happened yesterday?" "Liz said she was in her bedroom, and you just went berserk and kicked her door in and threatened her," said Mom. "Mother, Liz is a conniving witch. She is a liar. I did kick the door down, but I did not threaten her. And she knows exactly what she did to push me to do it. I expect Dawn to buy her lies. She obviously has learned to be very effective at fooling her father. All I ask is for you to look into your heart and ask yourself who is telling the truth," I said. "Jeff, I believe you. You have never lied to me. But can't you please come home?" Mom pleaded. "No, Mom, this is for the best. You and Dawn are starting your life together, and my being there will only cause problems you don't need. Tell you what, Mom, why don't you let me take you to lunch Sunday if you and Dawn don't have plans? I'll call you in a few days. I love you, Mom." I hung up and switched my cell phone off. Talking to her had made me realize that this was for the best. She really didn't need me there to cause more problems that could drive a wedge between her and Dawn. It was the right thing for both of us. I saw Liz at school a couple of times. We both went out of our way to avoid each other. Thursday afternoon, I stopped at the court and joined in a pickup game. I was on the skin side, so wasn't wearing a shirt. I noticed 2 girls that I had seen hanging out with the group Liz ran with. They seemed to be watching me and giggling between themselves. At first, I thought Liz might have a hand in something. I figured she was setting me up for something, but didn't know what. After the game, I went to put my shirt back on and get my books and head for Jake's when they approached me. They just stood and stared at me until I had finished pulling on my t-shirt. "Hi, my name's Jenny," said the cute blonde. "I'm having a party at my house Saturday and wanted to know if you would like to come. You're friends with Liz, right? Is she going to be there too?" I asked her. She frowned a little when I mentioned Liz. "If you mean Liz Wilson, yes, she will be there." "Well, Jenny, my name is Jeff Bradley, and if you talk to Liz about me, I think you will understand why it's better I don't come to your party. Thanks for the invitation, though. Goodbye," I said, picking up my books and trotting off towards my car. I called Mom that night and we chatted a while. I told her how school was going. She told me she missed me and wished I would reconsider coming back. In the end, we agreed to meet for lunch on Sunday. The next day at lunchtime, I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned around to see Jenny standing there. I didn't say anything. "Jeff, I did like you said, and I talked to Liz about you. I don't care what she says, I still would like you to come to my party. If you say yes, I will even tell her she's not invited. Jenny, I'm not a rich little playboy wannabe, like most the guys you girls chase. On Saturdays, I work construction during the day and am too tired to party at night. You and your kind are better off with Liz than with me," I said. "What's that supposed to mean, my kind?" "Just what is my kind?" she asked me. I could tell she was getting pissed. Being in the group of elitist a-holes, I am sure she was used to getting what she wanted. "Jenny, I don't know you personally, but I know how your little cadre of friends are. It's made of girls like Liz. Pretty girls with parents who have money. They suffer from some mental disorder that makes them delusional enough to think they are somehow superior to everyone else. They think they have to put down everyone who can't meet some bullshit criteria that their tiny little minds have created. They are lucky to have each other for friends because they are hated by almost everyone else. Those who don't hate them, like me, just feel sorry for them. They are so self-centered that they will never have the capacity to love anyone but themselves. They really are pretty pathetic. And even if you believe you're different, you are guilty by association. Your friendship and choice to hang with them shows that you condone their actions. So excuse me if I don't want to be included in your party and have to mingle with them. I picked up my tray and walked off, leaving her staring at my back. Saturday, I went to work with Jake, and that night I was beat. Even if I had wanted to go party, I was too tired and just went to bed. Sunday, I met Mom at an Applebee's restaurant for lunch. We had a nice lunch and kept the conversation light, but as we got ready to leave, she asked me to go across the street to the park with her. I agreed, and we walked until we found a bench by itself in the shade of a big oak. Jeff, first I wanted to tell you I believe what you said about Liz. You have always been a caring person, and I know you wouldn't treat Liz badly. I think now that you are gone, she is trying to come between Don and I. I don't know what to do, Mom told me. Have you talked to Don about this? I asked. No, not yet. She hasn't done anything to me like she did to you. But I'm pretty sure she is trying to undermine our love. Go to Don, Mom. Tell him how you feel. If he loves you as much as you do him, he will listen, I advised her. I know Liz is his daughter, but if she is doing what you think, then he will be forced to choose anyway. Mom hugged me and kissed my cheek. You are very wise for someone so young, she said. I told Mom I would keep my cell phone turned on from now on, and if she needed to call. She went home to Don and I went back to Jake's. Monday, I was in the cafeteria eating lunch and felt someone standing next to me. I looked up and it was Jenny and her friend who had been with her at the courts on Thursday. She asked if I would let her talk to me after last class. I was curious and I told her I would meet her by the courts. I did notice that she and her friend didn't go to the table that Liz was at. Rather, they found one by themselves. I didn't have to wait long. About 5 minutes after I got to the courts, both girls showed up. Jenny introduced her cute little redhead friend as Marilyn. We found a bench to sit at. I was pretty mad at you Friday about the things you said. I talked to Marilyn about it before the party started Saturday. We watched the people you talked about, and I realized everything you said was true. All the girls did was talk bad about others. They had to run down people to try to make themselves feel superior. I understood then why I was upset with you. You had told me the truth, and sometimes the truth hurts. I won't be hanging out with them anymore. Marilyn and I are going to try to find new friends. Nice ones. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for opening my eyes before I really did become like them. Bye. She had tears in her eyes when she talked to me. I couldn't help but believe what she said was true. She turned to walk away. Jenny, would you like to see a movie with me Friday? I asked. Jenny turned to look at me and her eyes searched my face. She decided I was serious and gave me a nice smile. Yes, Jeff. I would very much like to see a movie with you Friday. I got her phone number and told her we would talk more later, but I needed to hit the books as I had a big test tomorrow. Tuesday at lunch, I looked up to see Jenny and Marilyn, standing holding their trays looking at me. Would you ladies care to join us? I asked, rising to my feet. Jenny smiled and nodded. She took an open seat next to me, and Marilyn sat across from her next to my friend Bill. I introduced Bill to the girls. He looked at me curiously, wondering what these snobs were doing at our table. I just smiled at him. We sat and talked about our classes and which teachers were our favorite. People were coming and going. I wasn't paying any attention to them. I was enjoying talking to Jenny and Marilyn. Well, Jenny, I see you're slumming. I looked up to see Liz with one of the football jocks standing behind her. Actually, I wanted to sit with nice people for a change, retorted Jenny. Why don't you shove off, Liz? I said. Watch your mouth, boy, snarled the jock. I stood up fast and glared at him. Why don't I just rip your arm off and beat you about the head with it? I growled back. I had worn a skin-tight t-shirt that day, which was unusual for me. When he looked at me, he could see my muscles bristling. He looked in my eyes and knew I was serious. He pulled at Liz and told me that we would settle this later. I sat down again and Bill said, My hero, batting his eyes. Shut up, Bill, I said in a menacing tone. He laughed. I looked at Jenny, afraid I was going to see disapproval in her face. Instead, I thought I saw a look of admiration. The rest of our lunch passed without further interruption. When classes ended, I headed for the parking lot. As I got close to my parking spot, I saw Liz with the jock from the lunchroom with two of his football cronies standing around my car. One of them was sitting on the hood. I walked over and chose my spot in front of them. Get your fat butt off my car, I snarled. Taken back at my vehemence in the face of the odds, he stood up. The one from the lunchroom glared at me. Liz told us how you attacked her and threatened her. Why don't you try that with a real man? He dared me. First of all, my stepsister is a liar. And second, I don't see any real men around here. I shot back. Why, you stupid? The jock said as he swung at me. I was ready for him. I moved to my left and let him miss to the right. I grabbed his wrist with my right hand, pulling his arm straight, and drove the palm of my left hand into the outside of his elbow. I heard the joint snap. Fat, but who had been sitting on my hood, charged. My left foot shot out, catching him in the knee. I heard another bone snap. The third guy just looked at his two crippled friends laying on the ground howling in pain. I took a step towards him and said, "Boo." He turned and ran. I went to my car door and opened it, paused and looked at a stunned Liz. "Sis, you have a nice day here," I said, climbing in and backing up. As expected, I was called to the principal's office the next day. He wasn't pleased. The jock with the broken arm was the team's star receiver. However, enough witnesses had come forth to testify that I had acted in self-defense. There was little he could do. I ended up with just a warning about fighting on school property. One thing I didn't know was that Jenny was one of the witnesses. Concentrating on the task at hand, I hadn't seen her. She had even got the one guy who had run away to admit they had planned to jump me. She had simply asked him if he wanted me to come after him pissed. At lunch, I got my tray and sat at a table. The two guys sitting there looked at me nervously and got up and left. Bill came over and took his usual place across from me and batted his eyes and pretended to swoon. I had to laugh at his antics. Next, Jenny and Marilyn came over and didn't wait for an invitation, just sat down. Jenny sat next to me and Marilyn slid in next to Bill. She gave him a big smile and he grinned back at her. We ate and chatted. Nothing was said about yesterday's incident in the parking lot. Bill looked over my shoulder and said, "Oh?" I looked back and saw the starting quarterback headed for our table carrying his tray. He stopped next to me. "I'm Mark, right?" he said. "Yeah, I know who you are," I said, eyeing him warily. "I think you know my little brother Jason. He's in your karate class and pretty much idolizes you," Mark said. "Yeah, I know Jason. He's a good kid," I replied. "Anyway, I just wanted to apologize for what my teammates did. You won't have any more problems from my team. You have my word," Mark said, offering his hand. I stood and shook his hand. "Thanks, I appreciate that. Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all. Have a seat," I replied. Mark turned out to be a real likable guy. We were having a good time talking when I noticed Jenny stick her tongue out. I looked in the direction she was looking and saw Liz staring at us fuming. I looked over at Jenny. Now, I said. "Nice girls don't stick their tongues out like that." She blushed and looked down. "Sorry, Jeff. And if you ever stick your tongue out at me like that, you better mean business," I said. She looked at me and blushed. Mark and Bill started laughing and Marilyn snickered. Jenny couldn't help herself and giggled. We finished lunch and returned our trays. Mark and I shook hands. "You know, I enjoyed the company more at your table than the one I normally sit at. Mind if I join you again?" "Not at all, Mark. If you can stand hanging around, Bill, you're always welcome," I chuckled. "Hey now," Bill protested. Mark and I laughed. Mark became a permanent fixture at our table. Other team members would join us from time to time. The only other incident that occurred was when one of the huge offensive linemen made a disparaging remark about redheads and Marilyn went beet red with rage. I went to stand and the big guy's face went white and he began to apologize profusely. It was now common knowledge around the school about my martial arts skills and no one wanted to test me. Friday night came and I went to pick up Jenny. Her home was quite impressive. She definitely came from a family with money. Her mother, Susan McDonald, invited me in to wait as Jenny's still getting ready. She was an older version of Jenny. Blonde, blue eyes, very pretty and a nice figure. Jenny's father came out of the kitchen to meet the guy who was taking his daughter out. He was a big man, and by big, I don't mean fat. He had at least 4 inches on me. He looked me over. "So you're the guy who beat the hell out of those 2 football players?" "Well, I guess they had it coming." "So, what time do you plan to have my daughter home?" he asked. "Sir, I have to be at work at 6:30 in the morning, so I will bring her home right after the movie," I said. "What kind of work are you doing?" he asked. "I work on a construction crew building houses, sir," I answered. He didn't seem to be impressed. His little girl was going out with a construction worker. Just then Jenny came out of the hallway. She looked fantastic. If her father didn't stop her from going out tonight, I figured we would have at least this one date. Jenny ran to her father, and he leaned down so she could kiss his cheek. Then she did the same to her mother and took my hand and led me out the door. I enjoyed the evening. We even held hands during the movie. As I had promised, I had her home right after the movie. Jenny knew I had to work the next day and didn't say a word about being home at 9:30 on a Friday night. I gave her a chaste kiss on the cheek and went home. I didn't know her father was watching out the window. I was again bone tired when I got home Saturday. I was so grateful to Jake that he let me stay at his place that I gave him 110% effort. No job was too hard or too small that I didn't give it my best effort. Sunday, I met Mom for lunch again. I didn't like the way she looked. Our conversation over lunch was much more restrained. I could tell Mom wanted to talk, but not here. I took her to the same park as last time, and we sat at the same bench. "Oh, Jeff, I can't take it anymore," Mom said, tears streaming out of her eyes. Liz has become so hateful. She says the most terrible things when Don can't hear her. Did you talk to Don about this? I asked her. Yes, but I don't think he believes me, she answered. My mind was made up. Mom, you still have the money from when you sold the house, right? She nodded. Yes, Don told me to put it into a savings account. I told Mom to sit still. I walked a little ways off and called Jake. I had told him everything that was going on. He agreed immediately to help me. I told Mom to leave her car and come with me. She looked confused but did as I asked. We pulled up to Don's house and Jake's pickup was parked out front. As we got out, 2 more pickups pulled up with men I recognized as crew members. Jake got out of his truck and nodded at me. I took Mom's hand and Jake and the other 2 men followed us up to the house and through the front door. Don heard the front door open and came out of the den expecting to greet his wife. Instead, he saw me and my mother and 3 other men standing behind us. What the hell is going on? Don asked, confused. I'm here to get my mom out of this hellhole, Don. I expected you to take care of her, but it's obvious you don't love her enough to do that. Just sit down and keep your mouth shut, and you won't get hurt, I yelled at him. Why are you leaving? I love you, Don implored my mom. Liz had heard the noise and came into the room. She's the reason, I yelled, pointing at Liz. She is the most conniving, vindictive waste of human skin I have ever met. She drove me out of your house. Now she has done the same to the woman you say you love. You turn a blind eye to everything this vicious witch does. You two deserve each other, but my mother is leaving now. Don looked at me with tears streaming down his cheeks. Jeff, please, give me one chance to prove how much I love your mother. I didn't say anything, just stared at him. He went to another room and came back out with a checkbook. During this time, Liz had just stood there with a smirk on her face. Don took a pen and wrote out a check and held it towards Liz. You are 18 now and a legal adult. Here's a check for $100,000. I want you out of this house today. This is all you will ever get. Don't come back. Daddy, screamed Liz. No, you are an evil, vindictive witch just like your mother. I have just been trying to deny it because you are my daughter. You drove Jeff from this house, and now you want to drive the most loving, caring woman I have ever met out too. Get the hell out. You are no longer my daughter. Mom and I both stood there with our mouths open. I realized I was wrong. This man did love my mom. He just had to be pushed to make the right decision. My mother ran to him and threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. Liz realized she had lost. But, Daddy, I don't have any place to go, she said, sobbing. You should have thought that part out before you set out to drive my wife out of our home. And when I say our home, I mean my wife's and my home. This is our home. And as far as I'm concerned, about where you go, frankly, I don't give a damn. Realizing she had lost, Liz ran bawling to her room. My mom asked us to wait and took Don into the den. I went and brought everyone some beers. We sat and waited. A half hour later, Mom and Don came out. Mom was too soft-hearted to totally abandon Liz without making some effort to help Liz become a better person. Liz was offered the chance to stay in the mother-in-law apartment over the detached garage. She had to be there every night by no later than 10 p.m. She was not allowed to have any male company. She would not get the money Don had offered her. Instead, Don would set her up an account that he would fund. He would only replace the money in the account if she had a receipt that she could justify as necessary. New clothes were not to be included as necessary, as she had more now than any 18-year-old needed. She would be allowed to spend $50 a week on herself that she didn't have to show a receipt for. Liz was not to have any contact with either Mom or me. She was to never step foot in the house, and if she needed to talk to Don, she was to call him on his cell phone, not the house phone. Upon graduation, she had to find a job and pay her own way. She had to stay away from the Little Rich, which group she ran with. She was 18 now, and she was free to leave at any time. But if she did, Don told her to not come back. In a year, Don would decide if she had changed her ways. Then he might pay for her to go to the local college. She would still have to stay over the garage, so Don could make sure she didn't go wild again. Liz couldn't believe the rules she would be forced to accept. It was almost as bad as being in a convent. In the end, Liz realized that she had no choice but to accept. Jake and the guys who had come to help Mom move out instead moved Liz's stuff to the apartment over the garage. Her last act before she left the house was to apologize to Mom and me for what she had done. She actually seemed sincere, though I couldn't help but wonder if it was just because she was feeling sorry for herself. As for me, well, Mom, Don and Jake sat down with me and convinced me to move back in with Mom and Don. I would quit my Saturday job. They told me that there would be years of work ahead and I should have this time to study and take part in the things other 18-year-olds did. I went back to Jake's and packed my stuff. I told him I couldn't thank him enough for his help. He told me that was what friends were for, and if in the future I ever needed a job, I would have one working for him. Jake was a true friend. As for Liz's friends, when they found out she had been kicked out of the house and only could spend $50 a week, she became a social pariah to them. I hoped Liz was learning something about friendship. Now, friendless. On school days, Liz would come into the cafeteria to get a sandwich and then find somewhere to eat alone. Monday at lunch, I told my friends about the turnaround in my life, and I was now back at home with Mom and Dawn. For the rest of the week, we all continued to eat together. Friday came, and as we were putting our trays away after lunch, Jenny cornered me. "Jeff, have I done something wrong?" she asked. "Of course not, Jenny. Why would you ask such a thing?" I replied, "Because it's Friday, and you haven't said anything about us going out this weekend. If you don't like me that way, please tell me." I could see her eyes brimming with tears. I ached to take her in my arms and kiss her. "Jenny, please understand. I could tell your father is not pleased that you are dating some common average guy, especially one who was working construction. He wants more for you. I care too much about you to cause problems between you and your father." Jenny stared at me. Then the dam broke and the tears began to spill out, coursing down her cheeks. My heart was breaking. I went to reach for her, but she turned and ran down the hall. I stood and watched. Several tears slid down my cheeks. I got myself under control and went to my next class. What I didn't know is that Jenny had left school and went home and ran to her mother. She was sobbing so hard it took Jenny's mom 10 minutes to calm her down, so she could understand why her daughter was so distraught. When my last class of the day was over, I headed for my car. I saw a big man standing there with his arms crossed over his chest. It wasn't another football player. It was worse. It was Jenny's father. I wasn't afraid for me. I knew I could stand up for myself with my martial arts training. I just didn't want to get in a fight with Jenny's dad. I walked up to him warily, never taking my eyes off his, trying to judge the threat level. Jenny's dad simply stood and stared at me. "Jeff, I want to know if you think you are too good for my daughter," he asked. "No, sir, absolutely not," I replied, totally confused. "Then why didn't you ask her out again?" he said. His face remained free of any emotion, and I couldn't get a read on him. I was at a loss for words. "Well, sir, you see, it's just, well, I didn't think." I stuttered. He cut me off. "If you care about my daughter, I think you should call her before you get in your car. She's at home." Jenny's dad turned and got in his car and drove off, leaving me standing dumbfounded. Taking his advice, I took out my cell phone and hit speed dial where I had stored her number. Jenny's mom answered on the third ring. "Mrs. McDonald, this is Jeff Bradley. Could I speak with Jenny, please?" I asked. "Certainly, Jeff. Hang on just a second," she said. "Hello," I heard Jenny say tentatively. I could still hear her sniffling. "Jenny, I was wondering, if you don't have other plans, that is, would you allow me to take you out to dinner?" I groveled. "Oh yes, Jeff. I would love to go to dinner with you," she squealed in the phone. "I'll be ready by 6. The line went dead. I looked at the phone in my hand and chuckled. I jumped in my car and raced home. I was met by Mom and Dawn when I came into the house. I hugged Mom and shook Dawn's hand. Mom could always read my moods. "What's got you so all riled up?" she asked me. I had thought I was playing it cool, but she saw right through me. "I got a date tonight," I replied with a big grin. "Are you going out with Jenny McDonald again?" Dawn asked. Yeah. How did you know?" I answered with articulate eloquence. I was wondering how he knew about Jenny. I didn't remember telling them about her yet. Jenny's father and I went to school together. We're old friends. "He and I spoke a couple days ago about you," Dawn said. "I'm sure she's a lovely girl. I would like to meet her sometime," said Mom. "Tell you what, Mom, if she hasn't got tired of me and dumped me after a couple more dates, I will bring her by." I laughed. I kissed my mother on the cheek, then bounded up the stairs to get ready for my date. As I showered, I marveled at how much my life had changed. In the last week alone, I had gone from being a part-time construction worker living at a friend's house with the belief that I wouldn't have a chance to date Jenny anymore to being home again and getting ready to take her to dinner. At 5:30, I hurried down the stairs, kissed my mom on the cheek, and jogged to my car, barely hearing my mother telling me to have a nice time. I arrived at Jenny's 10 minutes early. Once again, Jenny's mom answered the door. Instead of inviting me in, she stepped out onto the porch and motioned for me to take a seat on a bench. She sat down beside me. "Jeff, I want you to know that Jenny's father, Malcolm, looks like a big gruff bear on the outside, and he does dote on his daughter. But on the inside, he is a teddy bear with a heart of gold. He is putting his trust, as I am, in you to treat our daughter with respect and not hurt her. Understand?" Susan said. "Yes, ma'am. I have only known Jenny for a short while, but I think she is very special. I would never knowingly do anything to hurt her." Jenny's mom smiled and patted my hand and led me into the house. Jenny's dad was inside and rose from his chair and offered me his hand. Jenny came out and saw us shaking hands and ran to her father and hugged him. Malcolm looked at me as Jenny took my hand. "I will take good care of your daughter, sir." "I believe you, Jeff," he said. We had a nice meal at an Italian restaurant, her choice. The more time I spent with her, the more I could see she really was a sweet, gentle person. We left the restaurant and took a walk in the park. "Jenny, the more I get to know you, I can't help but wonder how you ended up hanging around Liz and her friends. You don't seem to be like them at all." "Jeff, Marilyn and I have been friends since kindergarten. We were always close. When Liz started to invite us to go places with her and her friends, we felt flattered that they would ask us. We didn't run people down like they did, but you were right. Just by being a part of their group, we were condoning their actions. You made me take a good look at them and what I might have become, and I didn't like what I saw. I owe you for that, Jeff." "Thank you," she said. "No, Jenny, you don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you aren't like them, or I wouldn't have had the chance to get to know the real you." We held hands and walked through the park. We told each other things about ourselves. It was nice getting to know one another better. She told me she and Marilyn had seen what happened in the parking lot the day the jocks wanted to fight. I learned she was responsible for making sure the others who had witnessed it went and told what really happened. I had her back home by 11. I walked her to the door as any gentleman would do, but when I went to kiss her cheek, she put her hand behind my head and pulled me into a toe-curling kiss. She then told me she would see me tomorrow and went inside. What I didn't see was her father turn from the window with a smile on his face. He had watched his daughter initiate the kiss and had seen my hands only gently placed on her waist, and they did not wander to anywhere inappropriate. I drove home that night feeling wonderful. I had finally met a girl that made me feel that she was special, not just another date on a Friday night. I just hoped she felt something for me too. Jenny walked into the living room to find her father still up. "Well, Pumpkin, how was your date?" he asked. Jenny ran to him and hugged him. "It was wonderful, Daddy. He took me to that new Italian restaurant that I have been wanting to try, and we had a great meal. Then we went for a walk in the park. He talked to me, Daddy. He really listened to what I had to say. We held hands, but he never once tried to grab at me like the other two guys I went out with. I really like him, Daddy. He's so sweet. And I think he likes me too. I'm glad you had a good time, baby. Now run along and get to bed," Malcolm said, bending over and kissing his daughter on the top of her head. As Malcolm got into bed, his wife rolled over to look at him. "So," she asked, "I think Don was right. He does seem to be a remarkable young man." Saturday night, I took Jenny to a chick flick she wanted to see. I didn't mind. I just liked being with her. We went and split a pizza afterwards. It was closer to midnight when I had her home that night. I was hoping for another kiss, and she didn't disappoint me. I slept that night dreaming of her. I went down and ate breakfast with Mom and Don Sunday morning. Mom wanted to know how my dates had gone. She could tell by my smile alone what I thought. Then she suggested I call her and invite her for lunch. Don said he had a better idea. He hadn't actually seen Malcolm for a couple months. They had been invited to the wedding, but he was out of town on business that day and couldn't attend. He would invite them all over for a barbecue, and Mom could meet them all. Jenny brought her swimsuit, and we spent some time in the pool while her parents and my mom and Don sat on the deck and chatted. I was glad for the cool water as it helped a certain part of my anatomy stay in control. Jenny wore a bikini. It wasn't racy, but I saw more of her than I had before, and I was reacting as any 18-year-old would. When we ate lunch, Mom sat Jenny between her and me. They spent most of the time chatting. The apartment over the garage that Liz lived in had a window that looked out over the pool and backyard. I noticed Liz look out a couple times at us. I couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. After Jenny and her parents had left, Mom told me that she thought Jenny was a really sweet young lady, and I had done well in choosing her to be my girlfriend. She did warn me to take it slow and not rush into anything that would end up hurting either one of us. I got to school Monday morning to find Jenny and Marilyn waiting for me in the parking lot. Jenny came running over and gave me a quick kiss on the lips and took my hand as we walked into the school. It was official. We were now a couple. I walked her to her first class, and we sat together at lunch as usual. Marilyn continued to always sit next to Bill and smile at him. He would always be grinning at her, but I could tell he was afraid to ask her out. Bill was a good-looking guy, but had always been a bit insecure around girls. I knew he would love to go out with the pretty redhead. "Jenny, the state fair is this weekend. Want to go?" I asked. "That sounds fun. You can win me some stuffed animals," she giggled. "Why don't you two come with us?" I said, looking at Marilyn and Brad. Brad started stuttering and stammering. Tired of flirting and getting nowhere, Marilyn looked right at him. "Bill, would you like to take me to the fair?" she asked. Bill just nodded his head vigorously. Bill's grin never left his face for the rest of the day. I walked Jenny and Marilyn to their next class. Bill had to go to the other end of the building for his next class. Marilyn, I'm not trying to push you two together, but I know Bill, and he is looking forward to going to the fair with you. I've known Bill for several years, and he really is one of the good guys. He just happens to be shy around girls. If you are interested in him, you will probably have to lead him to where you want him, I told her. So what you're saying is if I like him and want him to kiss me, I will have to kiss him first, said Marilyn. Jenny piped in, well, sometimes a girl just has to take the lead or we might never get kissed. Right, Jeff? Hey now, I spluttered as the two friends ran into their classroom giggling. I would have kissed her eventually. I just didn't want to seem to be pushy. We had a great time at the fair. Bill and I both won the girls an armload of stuffed animals. Bill and Marilyn were walking hand in hand before the end of the night. I could tell they were really enjoying being together. We had so much fun we went back on Saturday night too. The next weeks flew by. Bill and Marilyn were a couple, and we double dated quite often. Liz had been living in exile for 3 months now. She continued to eat alone at school. Even if they hadn't shunned her, she wasn't allowed to associate with her old friends, and none of the other girls in school wanted anything to do with her. She had been the leader of the group that had bullied and belittled them. She always went straight home from school and didn't leave until she went to school the next day. She would go shopping for groceries on Saturday, then come straight back and not leave for the rest of the weekend. We did notice a change in her routine though for the last 2 weeks. She wouldn't return to her apartment until around 7 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Fearing that she might be up to no good, Don waited for her on the Friday of the second week her new pattern began. He came back in the house after talking with Liz. I'm not sure what to make of it, but Liz says she's volunteering at a retirement home 3 nights a week. She says some of the older people live in small apartments, and she helps them with housekeeping chores that they find difficult to do, said Don. Honey, I hope she is doing this out of the goodness of her heart, and she is truly changing her ways. It's a good sign, said Mom. The next Monday I followed Liz to see where she was really going, and sure enough she pulled into the parking lot of a retirement home and went inside. I waited and watched until she had left the reception area and went inside. I walked over to the receptionist and asked if that wasn't Liz Wilson I had seen. She said it was and remarked how much the residents here enjoyed having her help them, that she was a really sweet young lady. I walked out amazed that someone had said that about Liz. I kept an eye on Liz over the next 3 weeks. She still ate alone but seemed to be more at peace with herself. There was 2 months left to go before graduation, and Jenny and her parents came over for another cookout. It was a little too cool for swimming, but still nice enough to sit out on the deck. At one point I looked up at the apartment window and saw Liz watching us have fun. I could tell she was crying. I stood up and told everyone to excuse me, and I walked over to the garage and up the stairs to Liz's door. I knocked and waited until I heard a soft voice tell me to come in. She was sitting on her couch trying to wipe away the signs of her tears. I walked over to where she sat and held my hand out. She just stared at it as if it was a snake about to strike. I shook my hand up and down impatiently, and finally, she tentatively reached out and put her hand in mine. Neither of us spoke. I just gently pulled her from the couch and led her out the door and down the stairs to the deck. The Wilsons knew Liz, and we had explained to them the reason she wasn't around. They were grateful that my talk with Jenny had got her away from the influence of that group of girls. Everyone stared as I walked up, gently leading Liz. I hope no one minds that I have invited Liz to join us, I said. I could hear Liz hold her breath in fear she would be rejected. Mom looked at me, then at Liz. Mom stood and moved her chair to the side. Don, honey, bring that other chair over for Liz while I get her a plate and silverware. There's more than plenty for all. Don got another chair and placed it between his and Mom's. I led Liz over and seated her, then went back to my chair next to Jenny. Mom came out with a plate, silverware, and a glass. She set it down in front of Liz and picked up the pitcher of iced tea. Would you like some tea, Liz? Mom asked her. Yes, ma'am, thank you, Liz replied in a soft voice. Mom filled Liz's plate, and we all returned to eating and talking. Liz, for her part, didn't say anything, just ate in silence. I caught her looking at me several times. After we were finished, Liz jumped up and helped Mom clear the dishes. This was something she had always felt beneath her before. Once they had everything put away, Mom and Liz came back out. Thank you for allowing me to join you. I'm going to go back home now, she said to everyone, but was looking at me. You're welcome, sis, I replied. When she heard me call her sis, she burst into tears and fled back to her apartment. I saw Mom and Don looking at each other questioningly. When I kissed Jenny bye, as they were leaving, she remarked that Liz didn't seem anything like the old Liz. The next day was Monday, and we were all seated at our table. I saw Liz come in and get her food, and I caught her eye. She stared at me, and I nodded at the empty seat next to me. She didn't move, just continued to stare. I told Jenny to excuse me and walked over to Liz. Like I had done yesterday, I led her silently to our table and pulled the empty chair out and told her to sit. At first, everyone except Jenny and I seemed a little uncomfortable. Jenny and I resumed talking as normal. Before long, everyone else joined in. Liz never spoke, just ate in silence. When it was time to go to class, Liz looked up at me. "Thank you, Jeff." "You're welcome, sis," I answered. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she hurried off. Next day at lunch, when Liz came to get her lunch, she looked at me again. This time when I nodded at the empty chair, she walked slowly to our table and took her seat when I pulled her chair out. On Wednesday, she got her lunch and approached our table, and I pulled out her chair again. This continued for the next 2 weeks. She would come to the table but not sit until I pulled her chair out. It was obvious that she was taking nothing for granted and feared rejection if she sat down without my approval. Jenny and I talked about the change that had come over her. She definitely was not acting like the old Liz. After a couple weeks sitting at lunch with us, the others began speaking to Liz. Even though she wouldn't initiate conversations, she began taking part if spoken to. About once a week, I would tell Mom and Don about how Liz was doing at school. Graduation day arrived. I took Liz with me, and we drove over and picked up Jenny. Mom and Don would arrive later to watch from the auditorium. There were the usual long-winded speeches, and then finally we were called one by one to receive our diploma. Family and friends would applaud for those they knew. I saw Mom and Don sitting with Jenny's parents clap for me, and then again when Jenny's turn came. Liz, with the last name of Wilson, was near the end of those called. I watched as Mom, Don, and the McDonalds clapped for Liz, too. Finally, the ceremony was over. I got Jenny and Liz and led them out to where our parents would be waiting for us. Jenny ran to her parents for a hug and kiss, and Mom came to hug me. Liz stood looking at her dad. Don opened his arms and Liz threw herself into them, bawling her eyes out. We all went out to dinner and had a great time. Our parents told us about their graduations. We kidded, telling them we didn't know they gave out diplomas in the Stone Age. After dinner, we went back to our house for a while. Jenny and I had been invited to a couple post-graduation parties, but declined, preferring to be with family. Mom even brought out a bottle of champagne and allowed us to have some while we proposed toasts one by one. My turn came. The three of us have graduated from high school and have a new life in front of us. I think one of us has graduated from an old way of life to a new one in more ways than one. I have a proposal I would like to put before you, Don and Mom. I think it's time that my stepsister is given one final chance to prove she has changed by being allowed to return to her bedroom and return to her family. Don looked at my mother, and she nodded. Liz threw her arms around my mother's neck and hugged her as if her life depended on it, crying so hard her body was heaving. Mom hugged her back, stroking her hair, making shushing noises. "I'm sorry, Mom," Liz choked out between sobs. "I promise you I have changed. I will never treat you like I did again." My mother started to cry when Liz called her Mom. There, honey. It's time to forgive and forget. Welcome home, sweetie." When she had calmed down, she looked at Don. "Daddy?" she asked. For the second time that night, he opened his arms to her and hugged his sniffling daughter. Before I could react, she left her father's arms and threw her arms around my neck and squeezed so tight, I thought she was going to cut off the blood flow to my brain. Finally, she stepped back and looked down at the floor. "Thank you, brother. You are a better person than I will ever be," she said. I took her chin and lifted her face so she would look me in the eyes. "Do me a favor. Just prove to me that I'm as smart as I think I am. Don't let me down, sis." "I promise, Jeff. I will make you proud of me." Liz slept in her old bedroom that night, and the next day, Jenny and I helped her move her stuff back in. She and Jenny chattered away, and I could see them forming a new friendship. Liz went out and got a job as part of her promise to work when she graduated high school. Even though she was living back in the house, she was still on a 6-month probation and had to prove herself before Don would pay for her to go to college. When she wasn't working, she spent a lot of time with my mother, always eager to help with the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. They began to form a real mother-daughter bond. I got a summer job working for Jake. The work was tough, but the money was good. Because I was working for Jake, I usually only saw Jenny on the weekends. We would take Liz out with us sometimes. Other times we would double date with Bill and Marilyn, and then there were the times we just wanted to spend time together alone. We did come to be close with Liz. She really had changed, and after the way she had been turned on by her former so-called friends, she learned to cherish real friendship. I had told Jenny about the day Liz had bombarded me in the shower with the bucket full of ice water. She talked me into going for payback. I was worried this might backfire on me, but figured it would be a good test to prove she was a new person. We picked a day when Don and Mom were gone. I filled the bucket with cold water and added ice cubes. Liz had been sunning out on the deck, and Jenny and I knew she would be in to shower off the sunblock soon. By the time she came in, the ice had melted, just leaving very cold water. Jenny went in Liz's room first since she could just say she was coming up to talk. Liz hadn't locked her doors, figuring I would never invade her privacy. I watched from the hall as Jenny went to the bathroom door and eased it open. She signaled me over, and we crept in. With the shower curtains were closed, we couldn't see anything but could hear Liz humming to herself over the sound of the water. I raised the bucket and judged where my target was and poured it over the top of the shower rod. Liz screamed in shock and tore the curtain back. Her eyes were as wide as they could get, and she saw Jenny and I laughing our butts off. When she realized we were looking at her naked, she squealed and pulled the curtain around her, so just her head was sticking out. At first she just glared at us, but then she began to giggle and finally was laughing with us. "Okay, I get it. Payback is a witch. Now you two get out so I can finish my shower in peace," Liz said. Jenny and I went outside and sat on the deck until it was time for me to take her home. As we walked to the front door, I saw Liz sitting on the couch. Both Jenny and I had been accepted to the same university. My grades were good enough that I got a partial scholarship. Don was paying for the rest. Mom and Don got together with Jenny's parents to discuss our going to the same school. Mom and Sue came to the conclusion that Jenny and I should share an apartment as it would be cheaper. Malcolm almost went ballistic at his daughter sharing an apartment with a man. Mom and Sue, with cooler heads, finally made him realize that we were going to be living away from home and would have to make our own decisions anyway. If we were going to be doing what he was afraid we were going to be doing, he wouldn't be around to prevent it anyway. "Honey," Sue said to her husband, "our little girl has grown up now. And if she is going to become a woman, can you think of any other man in the world who is more perfect for her than Jeff? I guess you're right. And no, I can't think of anyone who I would trust with Jenny more than Jeff," he sighed. When our parents sat us down and told us their decision, Jenny was ecstatic and I was stunned. I looked at Malcolm. He stared back at me for a minute, then said, "You had better take care of my baby girl," he half growled. "Sir, I promise you I will," I said. Fall was coming, and our folks helped us to move into our new apartment. It had 2 bedrooms. Malcolm still wanted to pretend we wouldn't be sleeping together. And the truth is we hadn't. I did play with her body, but that was the extent of our exploration. Our parents finished loading our stuff in our apartment, then headed home on the 200-mile trip. Jenny and I busied ourselves putting our stuff away and ordered a pizza to be delivered. We had already had the cable and high-speed internet as well as phone service turned on. I hooked up the TV and computer while Jenny put other stuff where it belonged. We were pretty much through when the pizza arrived. We sat on the floor in front of the coffee table and watched TV, then just snuggled for a while. It had been a long day, what with the long drive and the unpacking. I went first and showered, then Jenny took her turn. We only had one bathroom, so we had to share. I went to my room and stripped to my boxers and slid under the sheets. I had a lamp on the nightstand that was the only light in the room. I saw the lights in the living room turn off, then Jenny was standing in my doorway in a nightie so short I could see her. I was getting excited. Jenny sauntered sexily across the room, lifted the sheets, and slid into bed laying across my chest. She gave me one of her toe-curling kisses. "It's time, my love. I've never made love before," she whispered in my ear. I was excited, but my conscience was still working. "Jenny, are you sure about this?" "My love, I have never been more sure about anything in my life." "Now make love to me," she said. I began to kiss her, starting at her lips, then her ears, and onto her neck. Eventually, she began to kiss me. "My God, Jeff. If I had known it was this good, I would have screwed you in the park on our first date," she giggled. I chuckled at that. "How long have you been on the pill?" I asked her. "Mama put me on them as soon as they decided we would share an apartment." "Just don't let Daddy know," she snickered. Although I didn't say anything at the time, I knew without a doubt this is the woman I wanted to marry. There were times that one of us would have to stay up almost all night cramming for a test, but other than that we rarely went a night without making love. It seemed we had just got there and it was Christmas break. We left Jenny's car and took mine. We stopped at Jenny's first to drop her off. Malcolm was in the front yard when we pulled up. Jenny jumped out and ran to her dad and jumped into his arms. Malcolm hugged his daughter, then sat her down and looked at her. "You're looking good, pumpkin," he said. "College life must agree with you." "Well, it's harder than high school, but Jeff makes me study." Malcolm walked over to me and held his hand out. We shook hands. "Looks like you're taking good care of my daughter." "It's a tough job, sir, but I guess someone has to do it," I replied. Jenny punched me in the shoulder and Malcolm laughed. We went in and Susan spotted us and ran to her daughter and hugged her tightly. She looked into her daughter's eyes. Then she walked over to me and hugged me tightly. "It's obvious that you are making my daughter very happy," she whispered into my ear. I just smiled at her. What else could I do? Our parting was a teary one. For the first time since we had arrived at our new apartment, we wouldn't sleep together. I arrived home and the first person I saw was Liz. She came running and threw her arms around my neck and hugged me tight. I'm so glad you're home. I've missed you, she said. I looked into her eyes and could tell she was telling the truth. Before I could even respond, Mom came out of the kitchen and ran to me. We hugged and traded kisses on the cheek. Like Jenny's mom had done, she looked me in the eyes. Jeff, she said questioningly. Mom, I haven't told her yet, but if I have my way, I plan on marrying her and making her the mother of your grandchildren. Mom smiled at me and hugged me again. Don, who had followed Mom and came over and shook my hand. We sat and talked about school and I caught up on what had been happening at home. Mom fixed my favorite meal for dinner. I missed Mom's cooking. Don't get me wrong, Jenny is a good cook, and I was learning my way around the kitchen, but with the demands of classes, we didn't often have time to do more than throw something together. When I went for a second big serving, I saw Mom smile. After dinner, Liz volunteered to clean the kitchen so Mom and I could have some more time to talk. Don went to the den to catch the news, and we sat in the living room. So Mom, how has it really been since I left? I said, knowing she would understand I was referring to Liz. Jeff, I would never have believed it was possible for one person to change so much. Liz has turned into one of the sweetest girls I've ever met. I think the problem had been that she didn't have a caring mother in her life. As much as Don did for her, she still needed her mother. But from what I have learned from Don, her mother is a cold-hearted witch who left her and Don. She's never even contacted Liz. We have become very close and she calls me Mom now, my mother said. I'm really glad to hear that. I was hoping she wasn't fooling me and it was all an act, I said. I just thank God for having you, Jeff. If you hadn't been the one to step in the way you did, I don't know what would have happened between Don and I. I'm afraid that it would have forced us apart. I was happy for everyone. Don had his daughter back, and Mom had a daughter she had never had. We talked more. I told Mom some things about Jenny and I, how we had grown so close and how much I loved her. I didn't mention anything about our sleeping together, but I knew that both our mothers were aware of the fact. I suspected that Malcolm knew it too, but tried to believe his little girl slept in her own room. The truth of the situation came out a couple days later. Jenny and her parents came over to have dinner with us, and the subject of Liz going to college came up. Liz had proven she was a changed person, and Don was going to pay for her education. I don't know if you have thought about it, Jenny began. But if Liz wanted to go to the same school as Jeff and me, she could stay with us. We do have a spare bedroom. Malcolm's head snapped up, and he stared open-mouthed at his daughter. Jenny realized what she had said. It was all out in the open now. Jenny walked to her father and sat in his lap, putting her arms around his neck. Daddy, I will always be your little girl, but I've grown up too. I'm a woman now. And that man sitting over there looking as shocked as you may not know it, but he is going to be the father of your grandchildren. I know how much you like to act like a tough guy, but I can tell you really like Jeff. Make me happy, Daddy, and don't be mad. Malcolm had never been able to deny his daughter anything. She had him wrapped around her little finger from the day she was born. Just don't make me a grandfather anytime too soon, he grumbled. Jenny giggled and squeezed his neck hard. I was ecstatic when Jenny told Malcolm I was going to be the father of her children. We hadn't really talked about our future, but I knew now that whatever it was to be, we wanted it to be with us together. Despite Jenny's offer, Liz wasn't going to stay with us, at least not now. It was too late for her to register for the next semester, and she was already enrolled in the local college. Jenny and I spent time every day together. It was tough going to sleep at night without her. She did spend a couple nights with me. Even her dad didn't grumble too much about it. Wasn't much point considering we shared a bedroom at school. We spent half of Christmas Day with each other's parents. For New Year's, we gathered at the McDonald's and celebrated together. 2 days later, Jenny and I returned to our apartment. I love my parents to death, but I'll be glad to get home, Jenny said as we drove. Me too, baby, me too, I replied. Liz never did come to stay with us. She got her degree while living at home. Jenny and I graduated at the same time. She had a business degree and mine was in engineering. Malcolm was pleased that I had chosen that field as the company he owned was an engineering firm. He gave both Jenny and I jobs when we were out of school. We got married just a few months after graduation. A year later, Jenny gave birth to our son. We named him Malcolm Donald Bradley in honor of Jenny's dad and my stepfather. A couple weeks after our son was born, Malcolm called me into his office for a private closed-door meeting. Jeff, the day you married my daughter, you became my son. I am grooming you to take over my position. I built this company and have always wanted to keep it in the family. When the time comes, you and Jenny will become the owners of my company, but you are the one with the engineering degree and will be the one to make final decisions. Now that you have given me a grandson, I can only hope he will follow in your footsteps and take over from you someday." I thanked him and told him I was honored. We shook hands and I turned to leave. Just as I reached for the doorknob, he spoke again. "One thing, son, don't get any ideas about kicking the old man out too soon. I'm not ready to be put to pasture yet." "Yes, sir, Dad," I chuckled. 2 years after our son was born, Jenny gave birth to our daughter. We named her Sarah Susan Bradley to honor both her grandmothers. The moment I laid eyes on her, I knew I was going to be in trouble. I understood now what Malcolm had felt the first time he had held Jenny in his arms. The company continued to grow. We had a solid reputation as one of the best engineering firms in the country. The time came when Malcolm did decide to retire. Jenny and I took over the company. She ran the accounting and personnel departments while I ran the engineering end. We made a good team. Our son has entered college now. And yes, he is studying engineering, which has made his grandfather extremely pleased and proud. Don had retired now too. Both sets of our folks were enjoying the fruits of their labor. They spent a lot of time with each other and often took trips and cruises together. Jenny and I had bought a home almost halfway between our parents' houses. That way they both had plenty of time to dote on their grandchildren. There has never been a woman born who could take me away from my sweet wife. And I make sure my kids know how much I love them every chance I get. I am nothing like my real father. And my evil stepsister Liz, she is as sweet as sugar. She married one of the engineers who work for our company and has 3 children. She's a great mom. I'm sure during the years she lived at home while going to college that my mom, with her kind and loving ways, became the role model for Liz. Unlike her birth mother, Liz would fight to the death before she would give up one of her kids. Sometimes at night, I hold my beautiful loving wife in my arms and thank God for how our lives have turned out. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.